Welcome once again, everyone. I'm Mayor Mike, and we are Talking Point. Today on my show, we have a couple of guests from the university, Yoon Bin Bae and Chris Keller, and Ismailia Adoba from the university. And they have done some research for the benefit of the city that I think we want to talk about. So welcome, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Christine, can you tell us a little bit about the College of Letters and Science and that undergraduate research symposium that was held in early May?
Sure. So every year, the College of Letters and Science at the University of Wisconsin-Stevens Point hosts an event where we invite our undergraduate students to come present their research and projects and talk with the community. It's an open public event, and so if members of the community want to come and learn about the research and projects that our students are working on, it's a great opportunity for students to practice their presentation skills and also talk about the projects that they work hard on at the university.
So give us an idea of what types of projects have been done in the past.
So in the College of Letters and Science, we have a lot of different departments that are involved. So biology, physics, chemistry are some of the larger departments, computing and new media technologies. But we're from the Department of Geography and Geology, and so a lot of our research stems around spatial questions and how do we look at patterns and trends on or near the Earth's surface using sort of a spatial perspective. And so in addition to what we're going to discuss today, we've done projects related to planning and zoning, which Dr. Adoba is a expert in. We do projects related to geoscience and geology, physical formations, human geography, which looks at sort of the social aspects of how we interact with our world and with each other. And so there's a lot of great projects that come out of our department.
Okay, good. Well, thank you. Dr. Adoba, tell us how you're involved and some of the things that go on in your department.
In my department, I tend to oversee the urban and regional planning minor, which is now the urban and regional planning, geodesign minor. It's been changed. What I do is we have a capstone class whereby I have students undertake projects.
Okay.
So I solicit, problems from jurisdictions around the area, and then the students work on it, and at the end of the semester, they get to present. Last year, I had students actually undertake a study on TIF districts in Stevens Point. Mm-hmm. They looked at the TIF district on Division Street.
That's District 5, yes.
District 5,
TIF
yes.
District 5.
So they examined it because there was, I had discussed with Kyle, the economic development planner, and he said the district was not generating the expected level of revenue or investment when it was first put in place. So the students had looked at it to see, okay, what can be done to turn the district around, and they had presented their findings at the symposium. So basically, the planning program gives students the fundamental skills to be able to, when they graduate, address real-world problems.
Okay, great. And I understand that our planning and zoning administrator, Kyle, was actually a student of yours.
Yes, Kyle was my student. I actually had a project that he did. It's still in my office. I showed him the last time he came around.
Yeah.
So I had a project he did, and he did a good job. So I had kept his project as an example to show students. So, okay, if you put in effort, this is how far it will take you. So
yeah, and Kyle does a fabulous job for the city. So I think we owe you a debt of gratitude. So thank you.
Thank you.
So that's a little bit about what we're going to talk about today is land use and maximizing revenue. So you tell us a little bit about yourself, first of all, and then a little bit about the project that you chose.
Mm-hmm. So my name is Yoon, and I'm a natural resources planning major with GIS minor. And well, actually, I'm from South Korea. I'm an international student here, graduating in December this year.
Okay.
So yes. So Christy mentioned about this project last year when I take her classes, and I was really interested researching about the urban planning aspects related to tax revenue, so I contact her to start this research, yes.
Okay, and so the research that you did is based on what?
Oh, so it's based on the looking at the tax revenues in city of Stevens Point, also with the Portage County.
Okay.
So we wanted to know how to use the tax revenue efficiently for recommending what to do with the tax revenues and to see the changing patterns of this.
Okay. And excuse me. So a little bit of what I gleaned from the presentation was the work that you did looked at the concentrations of tax revenue from the lowest generating pieces of property to the highest and most densely packed income generating properties, which it's very interesting to see in a visual format. But basically what it is our residential is not necessarily the highest and best use for generating tax revenue. And that's all we looked at. We didn't look at housing needs or anything like that. I say we, I mean you. But as you can imagine, our business districts tend to generate the highest tax revenue per square foot or acre, or how you measured that. Where did you get your information? How did you go about accumulating the information for your project?
Oh, so city of Stevens Point, Kyle Cairns, and Jeff Herman from Portage County.
Okay.
And yeah, they gave us the GIS data and all the residential use types data to help this research. Yes.
Christine, anything you wanted to add on how you started accumulating the data?
Sure. So actually, I just want to go back to briefly to talk about sort of the inspiration for how the project came about.
Oh, yes.
So about a year and a half or 2 years ago, one of our colleagues on campus, Tori Jennings, sort of started this initiative of the Division Street, revisioning Division Street. Mm-hmm. And when we think about that space, I'm a lifetime, well, I haven't lived here my entire life, but I was born and raised in the city of Stevens Point. And so my perspective on Division Street has always been what Division Street has looked like over the past 35 or 36 years that I've actually been in the community here. And it's very different than what downtown Main Street looks like. And so part of what she was interested in is how can we re-envision Division Street and maybe put some different development types in there to make it more appealing. It is a gateway to our community. Mm-hmm. It's a gateway to the university, and it's oftentimes the first thing people see when they come to Stevens Point. I had attended a conference out in California in 2014, and it is a conference that's put on by the Environmental Sustainable Research Institute, which is ESRI. They are a company out in Redlands, California. And every year they host a geodesign summit where I was able to see a presentation live by a man by the name of Joseph Minikazi. And if you look up his presentation, it's available on YouTube. It's called Mapping the Dollars and Cents of Land Use Patterns. Okay. And he really starts with this. He starts by talking about this idea of our county boundary is a finite boundary. We have this finite amount of land within to work with. And if we think about that land as being sort of like a crop in terms of how we produce it, and each time we make a development choice, we're sort of using a portion of this finite resource to put new developments into our community. And so he talks about it from an economics perspective, which is a little bit different than maybe we normally think about things when we start to use development in our communities. Because when we start to spend the land, we oftentimes don't get an opportunity to re-spend it again once a development is in place. Mm-hmm. The other interesting thing about his research is he says if you break it down if you give everybody a level playing field, then it makes for an interesting comparison too. And so part of what we did with Yoon's research is we looked at parcel revenue, so individual parcel revenues within not only the county but also very focused on the city of Stevens Point. But we standardized those parcel revenues on a per acre basis. So a home that sits on a quarter-acre lot in the city of Stevens Point has the potential of generating a lot more revenue than a home that might sit in a more rural area of the city of Stevens Point on a 2-acre lot, because we've spent more property, or we've spent more of our land or more of our resources dedicated to that property versus one that's in the city. So that was sort of the inspiration for the research in terms of how we decided to go about this. We actually invited some community partners into this, and so Jeff Hartman, who is
County GIS?
He's our GIS coordinator for the Portage County Planning and Zoning Department, and he has been maintaining parcel data for the county since 2001. So it's a really interesting, rich data set that we have to work with. It's countywide data. We have tax revenues going back to 2001, and so we can look sort of historically over time at what these revenues are doing as these new developments sort of come into place and old developments go away. And so visualizing that sort of three-dimensionally or on a map really adds a lot of context to what we're talking about in terms of what choices the city and county has made over the last 15 or 16 years.
So your research, Ewan, that covered the entire county, right? Not just the city of Stevens Point. And I know there were some comparisons done between what was generated in 2001 versus 2007 versus 2015. So you can kind of see where the patterns of development have been going. I know it was interesting for me with the city, knowing that we have some older sections of town that are predominantly residential. They don't change use very much, but the areas that we can expand a little bit towards the north, a lot towards the east and the southeast, were the areas that we're really starting to see revenue generation based on the tax study and the research that Yoon had done. So it was really interesting to see kind of how we're spreading out as a city away from the core, but yet our core Main Street area seems to be the highest revenue generator per acre. So Yoon, tell us a little bit about what you gleaned from the information that you researched.
So while the tax revenues are spreading towards the rural or suburban area, actually the residential single-family revenues were concentrated in the city center area. So while we are thinking about the urban sprawl costs, such as constructing sewage, school, and police stations, we really need to consider those urban sprawl costs relating to collecting the tax revenue efficiently for the better collecting tax revenue.
And that's something that we've been talking about on city council and internally within the city for a while now too, is when you have that development on the outskirts of the city, the city bears the burden of the infrastructure that's needed to support that development. So new roads, new water lines, sewer lines, stormwater lines, and all of those cost additional money. So if you are spending, and I'm just throwing out random numbers here, let's say $10,000 to put in a road and utilities to service a parcel, if that parcel doesn't generate enough tax revenue to cover the cost of that infrastructure over the life of the infrastructure, the city loses money. So if we're only generating $8,000 and it costs us $10,000 to put it in, over the life of that infrastructure, we're losing money. Now those numbers are completely random and it costs a lot more than that to put things in. But it's an interesting thing to think about. Growing for the sake of growing is not terribly sustainable. And what we want to do is when we do grow, we want to make sure that the taxpayers are covered by the cost that they're going to invest in infrastructure by the development. And that's typically why we see businesses or commercial development being more in favor of paying for that infrastructure, because residential doesn't necessarily do that unless you have relatively densely packed residential. And maybe that's probably more your field, Dr. Adoba, but can you talk about that a little bit, what your thoughts are on that sprawl?
Well, you bring up a good point about taxpayers, because if you look at the findings of her study, development, like you said, is moving to the outskirts. Okay, so we need to put in infrastructure to support this development. Well, at the same time, the tax rate for all the residents is the same.
Right.
So indirectly, those that live closer to the center are subsidizing those that live outside. Okay, now,
Okay.
it brings up a question. Is that fair? We can debate that. But for me, it's interesting to see that as development is pushing out towards the outskirt, the core or the center, that's District 1, right?
District
Yep.
4, 5, 6.
6. Okay. Those districts still generate, in comparison, the same amount of revenue compared to the new development outside. So the question would be, should we be encouraging development outside rather than trying to do infill development?
Okay. Okay. So what you're saying then is that my district is one of the older districts in town, pretty dense, the 4th district. So our lots are typically smaller, meaning you have more houses per acre than you would on the outskirts of the city where you have larger lots. So lots on my side of town are roughly about 100 feet by 50 feet. So what you're saying is that the revenue generated by those denser residential units is close to comparable to what we're seeing on the outskirts?
Yes, if you adjust for parcel size.
Okay.
That's what we standardize parcel size, and looking at it, it's comparable, because even if you look at the revenue generation, just in dollar values, it seems as if the parcels have been generating a lot of revenue. But when you adjust for inflation, in reality, you will see that it's not actually increased if you are just using $2015. So that was interesting to me.
Now, the one thing I noticed in your research, Yoon, was some areas were growing and some were declining, and you had it sorted out by aldermanic districts, I believe. Do you see any correlation between areas that are declining in value and areas that are growing? Is it because things are getting redeveloped, or do you have any idea where that might be happening?
Yeah, so in business district area, well, after the development was happened, the revenues were increasing throughout the years.
Yeah.
And yeah, that was the trends because of the development patterns changes.
Okay.
And yes.
So the business corridor that we were talking about, TIF District 5, which is North Division Street, it would occur to me that because there are quite a few larger parking lots in the Kmart area, Kmart McDonald's area, there's the Cooper Motors, or former Cooper Motors site, the North Point Shopping Center, Triggs, they all have pretty large parking lots. Parking lots are not going to generate revenue in most cases. So when you did your research, it looked like there was still a fair amount of revenue being generated per acre. Is it really saying that if we reduce the required number of parking spots for a development, and the city has ordinances that require certain numbers of parking spots for certain developments, if we were looking at reducing that, would we actually see an increase in the value per acre in developments on the north side?
Yeah,
I mean, in my opinion, I'll say yes, because if you look at zoning tends to impose artificial constraints on land use. So we say, this is the use you can have in this area.
Yep.
Okay. But if we leave it to the free market, the highest and best use will be the one that will occur there. Okay. So when we zone, and like you said, we have parking requirements. Okay.
Right.
So if your structure is residential, if it's commercial, this is the amount of parking space required. Well, if you drive along Division Street, most of those parking lots are empty most of the time. So in my opinion, if they are put to a different use and thereby, maybe change the zoning ordinance whereby businesses can share parking lots rather than require a certain number of parking spaces, we can maximize the utilities of, those parcels.
And that seems to make a lot of sense. I know downtown, a lot of businesses share parking lots. The big one in front of Shopko is not the Shopko lot. I mean, we call it that, but all the Main Street businesses probably have someone that uses that. I know a lot of places that have employees nearby use that lot. So sharing that and not requiring each business to have X number of spots, I think makes a lot of sense. And I know we're looking at our comprehensive plan right now, doing some updates. So the research that Yoon has done is really going to help with that. So where do we go from here? We've got the information from Yoon's research. What can the city do with it? Anyone?
I think for me, as a planner, the city needs to make decisions. And I think what the study does is, like you said, it gives a visual presentation of where growth is occurring. So the city can look at it and say, okay, why is growth occurring on the outskirts? Is it because of our zoning makes it easy to, build out there? Or what can we change in some of our ordinances so that rather than that development occurring out there, it begins to occur closer to the core of the city?
Okay.
Thereby reducing expenditures, because the study does not look at expenditures, but you brought it up because we need to service those developments out there, infrastructure, services, roads, maintenance. We need to provide all that for those lots out there. But if we can change some of the ordinances to encourage infill development,
Okay.
I think that would be a good thing. And
Repurposing some of those parcels makes a lot of sense. Now, we've got the former Lullaby site, which is downtown, just north of Centerpoint. We've been trying to market that one for years, and we have people that show an interest, and then things kind of fall apart. There doesn't seem to be a real solid answer as to why things fall apart, but to me, that seems like a perfect location. Close to downtown, you're walking distance to all of the shops and businesses downtown. You are close to the campus. You are close to grocery shopping, and you're really walking or biking distance to that North Point corridor that we talked about. Those areas that are sitting vacant or abandoned seem to me ideal targets for redevelopment. Because they're in that core, and right now, vacant land or an empty building such as the former Belkey Lumber site, which isn't in business anymore, would seem to be ideal candidates for that, either a repurpose or a redevelopment, and that would even further increase the tax revenue generated per acre in that downtown corridor.
Yeah. The Lullaby site is interesting because I think it's zoned commercial.
It is.
Okay. And, if you want to repurpose that lot, it'd be good to maybe relax the zoning restrictions whereby it allows for mixed use.
Well, and we do allow for mixed use, but I think they're all conditional uses.
Okay.
I think that's what it is.
Okay. Yeah.
And that's really what we've been seeing. We've seen a few people with apartment developments proposals for that site, some mixed use where they may have retail on one level and apartments on the other levels. But it also has to cash flow for these developers too. So they have to make their decisions based on what they can fiscally handle. And I think with the advent of our new housing study, I think that's going to help considerably with some of the developers in allowing them to choose what to build based on the needs that the study shows.
I just have a few things
Sure.
that I would like to add to that. So for me, what the study sort of offers, well, first of all, when we were brainstorming sort of the objectives of this study, we had brought in Jeff Hartman from the county, who really wanted a visualization of what parcel revenues looked like for the entire county.
Okay.
That's something that he thought would be valuable to his team. We also brought in Kyle Kearns from the city planning and zoning department, and he made us very aware that the city is going through a new comprehensive plan in 2018. And he also wanted to provide some visuals to the city and also to the alderman districts. And so I hope one intention of this would be for each alderman or alderperson to look at the data, look at the trends that are happening in their particular district, and kind of reflect on that and sort of use that information to make future decisions and future ordinance decisions. Anytime we do a research project like this, it's really interesting because in a limited amount of time with an undergraduate student like Eunice, it's amazing what she's been able to accomplish in this past 9 months as we've been going through this study. Of course, when we do a project like this, a lot of research answers lead to new research questions.
Sure.
And so it would be an interesting conversation to hear sort of what other questions the city would want answered, and maybe what other visualizations we could provide for you. But I think this was a good segue into a discussion about what are the current ordinances, where are we encouraging development, and do we want to, the city has to make a decision, do we want to continue the development patterns that we have been seeing over the past 15 years based on what we know about the costs of urban sprawl.
Okay, good. We just have a couple minutes left. Is there anything you'd like to add?
Yeah, so adding top of that, like talking in a national scale, a few years ago, Obama administration said the zoning reform is a national priority and calls the local laws to allow dwelling units and allow denser developments and eliminate parking requirements and among other changes. So this result will really helpful to revising the tax revenue and the comprehensive city plans. So I hope.
And I think that those are great ideas, because that's one of the things that we've been looking at is ways that we can reduce the need for all of the currently required parking spots. People are choosing different modes of transportation, whether that's our public transportation system through our buses, or biking or walking. One of the things that I like living where I am is I can walk to the park, I can walk downtown, and it's I don't have to use the car everywhere. Mm-hmm. So the parking requirements that we have are, from the 70s, and I think it's about time we look at some of those to try and maximize our value per acre, which is exactly what your research is showing. So I appreciate it. I know the citizens of Stevens Point appreciate it. And hopefully we can incorporate some of this information into our future planning. Now, we will have the PowerPoint presentation on our website at stevenspoint.com. But if someone wanted to find out more information about your project, or maybe the research symposium projects in general, where would we need to go to?
If publics want to know more about this research, they can email me to ybae1227@gmail.com, and yes.
Okay, and you are still here at UW for how long?
Yeah, from until
December.
December,
right?
yes.
Okay, December of 2017.
Yes.
Christine, if someone wanted to get in touch with your office?
They can also contact the Department of Geography and Geology, and I would be happy to answer any questions. We also do have the College of Letters and Science puts a repository up every year of all the presentations.
Okay, and Dr. Adoba?
Same Department of Geography and Geology.
Okay. All right. Well, great. Thank you all. Is there something you want to add?
I just have a couple more acknowledgments to folks who sort of helped us brainstorm this research and these ideas. Nathan Sandwick, who's a community resource development educator at Portage County and UW Extension, also was involved early on in the planning of this project. Assistant Professor of Economics Jerome Segura, who's also at the University of Wisconsin-Stevens Point. He's also a chief economist for the Central Wisconsin Economic Research Bureau. And then again, Jeff Hartman and Kyle Kearns. Just another thank you to them for their time and their input. And we hope that we can continue to collaborate on projects like this with the city of Stevens Point, and answer those questions that we all have.
Yeah, I know this is going to be a big help. So, Christine, Yoon, and Ismailia, thank you very much for being our guests today on Talking Point, and we look forward to seeing and using some of the research you provided us, Yoon. Until next time, I'm Mayor Mike, and we've been Talking Point.